Your developers are already using GitHub Copilot. Maybe you rolled it out on purpose. Maybe it showed up through individual licenses you didn't fully track. Either way, the code's already being written with it. And there's a decent chance you don't have a single written rule about how. That's the gap. Not whether to allow Copilot. That ship sailed. The gap is that nobody's written down what using it responsibly actually means at your company. So that's what we're going to do in the next 9 minutes. I'll walk you through the exact structure of an acceptable use policy you can write today, section by section, on screen. There's no legal background required. I'm going to show you the skeleton. You'll fill in the specifics for your organization. There's two failure modes here, and most companies pick one of them. The first is the ban. Security gets nervous, blocks Copilot at the network level, and feels safer. Except the developers who want it just use it on a personal machine or personal accounts, completely outside of your visibility. You didn't remove the risk, you just made it invisible. A ban you can't enforce isn't a control, it's a wish. The second failure mode is the shrug. Roll it out, say nothing, hope it's fine. That works right up until the day someone pastes a customer's data into a prompt or ships a chunk of suggested code nobody can account for, and there's no policy to point to that said don't. A policy is the third option. It's not about whether people can use the tool. It's about making the responsible path the obvious one and writing it down so it's a shared expectation instead of a guess. That's the whole job of this document. And honestly, the act of writing it is half the value. It forces you to decide what you actually think before there's an incident forcing the decision for you. Now, every policy opens the same boring, necessary way. Who does this apply to and what does it cover? Scope sounds like a filler, but it isn't. This is where you answer the questions that cause arguments later. Does this cover full-time engineers only or contractors too? Does it cover Copilot in the IDE, Copilot in CLI, Copilot chat, Copilot reviewing pull requests, or just code completion? Spell it out. The version of this that says applies to all use of AI coding assistants and then names the specific tools is the version that doesn't get lawyered around later. So purpose is one short paragraph. Why does this document exist? Something like to let the team use AI assistants productively while protecting client data, code quality, and the company's intellectual property. That's it. You're stating the goal so the rest of the policy reads as a means to an end, not arbitrary rules. Think of scope and purpose like the first slide of a deck. Nobody remembers it, but if you skip it, the whole room spends the meeting confused about why they're there and what they're looking at. All right, section 2, acceptable and prohibited uses. Now, this is the heart of it, and it's where most policies get vague and useless. Use AI responsibly is not a rule, it's a vibe. So get concrete. The acceptable list is the stuff you actively want people doing. Generating boilerplate, writing test scaffolding, explaining unfamiliar code, drafting documentation, speeding up the parts that were always tedious. Naming the green light uses matters as much as the red light ones. It tells people the tool is genuinely endorsed for real work, not grudgingly tolerated. Then the prohibited list. This is where you think about what we actually can't have. Pasting secrets, credentials, or keys into a prompt. Putting client or customer data in a tool that might log it. Shipping AI-suggested code into a security critical path without human review. Using it to generate code you then represent as entirely your own when provenance matters. You won't get this list perfect on first pass. You'll add to it the first time something goes wrong. That's normal. The point is to start with the obvious ones written down, not to predict every edge case. The test for every line on both lists is, could a new hire read it and know what to do without asking you? If they still have to ask, it's too vague. All right, code provenance and review. Here's the one people skip, and it's the one that bites. When Copilot suggests code, where did the pattern come from, and who's accountable for it once it's in your code base? You don't need to turn your team into IP lawyers. You need one operating principle written down. AI-suggested code is treated like code from any other source. It gets reviewed by a human before it ships, and the human who merges it owns it. That single sentence does a lot of work. It means there's no "the AI wrote it" defense when something breaks. It means your existing code review process, which you already have, is the control. You're not building a new bureaucracy. You're saying the bar doesn't drop just because a machine typed the first draft. It's the same rule you'd have for a junior dev's pull request. You don't merge it unread because they're enthusiastic. AI suggestions get the same treatment: familiar process, new input. And you note briefly, without trying to be a lawyer about it, that questions of code licensing and IP ownership should go to whoever owns legal at your company. You're flagging that the question exists. You're not answering it in this document. That's deliberate, and I'd leave it that way. Okay, Section 4, data handling. Okay. This is the section your security and compliance people will actually read, so you have to make it clear. The core question is, what's allowed to go into a prompt and what isn't? The clean default is that anything you wouldn't paste into a public forum doesn't go into an AI tool. Client data, personal information, credentials, anything under a confidentiality obligation. If your company operates in a regulated industry or has data residency requirements, this is where that lives, and this is where it gets specific to you. Then say something about which deployment you're actually using, because it matters enormously. An enterprise Copilot configuration with data handling guarantees is a different risk profile than someone's personal account. The policy should point at the approved configured version and say, this one, not the free one you signed up for on your own. Okay. I'm keeping this generic on purpose because your data rules are yours. A law firm, a hospital, and a marketing agency have completely different versions of this section. The structure is the same, the specifics are where your context goes, and it's where it's worth a real conversation with people who own compliance. All right, Section 5, review, ownership, and enforcement. This is the part that turns a document into an actual policy, and it's the part everybody forgets. There's 3 questions. Who owns this policy? Meaning, whose job is it to update it when the tools change, which they will, fast? How often does it get reviewed? Put a real date on it. Quarterly is reasonable for something moving this quickly. And what happens when someone doesn't follow it? Not to be punitive, but because a rule with no consequences is just a suggestion. A policy that nobody owns, nobody reviews, and nobody enforces isn't a policy. It's a document that makes you feel covered while changing nothing. AI without operations is just a demo. An AI policy without an owner, a review cadence, and enforcement is just a demo of governance. The mechanics are what makes it real. 5 minutes of deciding who owns this is worth more than 5 pages of beautifully worded rules that nobody maintains. So that's the whole structure: scope, acceptable and prohibited uses, code provenance and review, data handling, and operational mechanics that keep it alive. 5 sections. You could draft the first version of it this afternoon. And you should, because the alternative isn't no policy. It's an unwritten policy that lives in your head that nobody else can follow, that doesn't exist the moment you're on vacation and a decision needs to be made. I've put a generic template in the description. Every section we walk through ready for you to fill in with your specifics. Take it, adapt it, get the legal experts to review it, and ship a first version. A rough policy that exists beats a perfect one that you're still drafting when the incident happens. Now, the tool's already in your code base. The only question is whether the rules are written down or not.